All right, guys, so what we're going to do is go over the principle of art called emphasis, and that's essentially bringing attention to one area of your artwork. So in this little example on the screen, you can see this little artwork of tomatoes, and one of them is green, and therefore your eye kind of goes to the green one. It might still move around the whole picture plane, but it keeps going to go back to that green one because that one's attracting attention. Sometimes emphasis is also called a focal point, and I'll use both terms interchangeably. But there's different ways you can use your existing knowledge and different kinds of techniques to create emphasis. Like sometimes kids just think putting something in the middle of the canvas will create emphasis, and sometimes that does. But there's other more interesting ways of doing it. So there are 5 methods for creating emphasis, and one is using elements of art. And remember, the elements of art, they're line, shape, color, value, texture, space. But there's other ways. There's also simplicity. There's grouping and placement. There's size and repetition, and there's isolation. So we're going to go through each of these methods and kind of show visuals for each one. So the first one is using one element of art. Now, there's like 6 elements of art. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the 6 different kinds of elements of art and examples of each one. So here you can see the element of art is line. And this artwork is really using all the line to create a focal point. That's that empty little space off center to the right. And it's just a black and white image. So the color isn't really creating emphasis, value is not really creating emphasis. It's really just the line itself is doing all that work. And you can have a more complicated image that uses line to create a focal point. This one's a kind of a simple version to kind of hit it home. But anytime you have lines that are all going in one direction, they'll kind of bring the viewer's eye to that spot. Next one is shape. So if you want to use shape to create emphasis, this is a little kind of easy technique. This one kind of shows you a whole image with just rectangle or just squares over and over and over, but there's one different triangle. So obviously your eye's going to go to that one spot. It's going to keep going there, even though it will move around the whole image. It's going to want to go back to that one area of difference. So having shape, having a different shape, having a larger shape, that can really be a nice way to create a focal point in an artwork. Now, if you were going to do this with a more realistic image, like say you had an artwork full of all fruit, if one fruit's a different shape, if it's like all apples and oranges, they might not really be that different, but you have, one pineapple, that's a very different shape. So shapes can be abstract or representational, but they can be a nice way to have emphasis in a work. This example is using the element of color. So here we have the same kind of basic shape happening, right? It's like kind of bumpy rectangles. They start to swirl around. The only difference is one is a warm color and the rest are cool colors. So that difference in color is going to create emphasis that happens all the way over here. And if you have a focal point's usually one small area of a work. This one has emphasis on kind of a larger area, so it's less of a focal point and more of emphasis. Sometimes those terms are very interchangeable and sometimes they're slightly different. This is an example where they're a little different. And then we have value. So again, we have that kind of repeated motif of the square happening over and over, but one is gray. So your eye's going to see that gray one first. It's going to go there, and that's because it's a different value. And then for texture, there's different ways of having texture. There's texture that is real and texture that is implied. So this is an example of real texture, where you're going to look at these flowers because they have all this kind of bumpy physical texture where the paint is kind of almost sculpted, and that's going to stand out from the background that's a little more flat. So this is kind of a realistic texture that's drawing your attention. But you can also have implied texture, which is where you might try and make something look fuzzy or hairy and everything else is smooth in your composition, or vice versa. Maybe you have like one area where everything is smooth and then everything else is kind of furry, bumpy, pointy, or sharp. And then next we have space. Now space is what you just did with your cityscape, where you have things that appear in the foreground and background. And here you have a background with people, but the couple in the foreground, they're larger, they appear closer to us, and for that reason they kind of get more emphasis than everything else. So those are all examples of how to use one element of design to create emphasis. And there are 4 other methods, so let's go through a few examples of them. Some of these might feel like they overlap with each other, and it's because some of them kind of do. And sometimes there's subtle differences between them. So using simplicity is another method to create emphasis. Here, this is a lot of complication with the drawing of the cat's face. This is all one very simple negative shape. So essentially the way to use this one is everything that you don't want to emphasize is just simple. And here, a black shape is ultra simple. And then the artist obviously wants you to look at the cat, so to keep your attention there, this negative shape is just flat black. And also, again, notice how this is not center of the page. You can have a focal point or emphasis that's kind of off to the side or up top or, not center, and that can be really interesting, and it can work really well. And this is one way to do that. Then if you use grouping and placement, so this design, the artist placed all the stars over the whole composition. They're varying in color, they're randomly placed, but no one star gets more attention than another. And this image does not have any emphasis. This is a good example of just kind of a pattern that repeats. We're not going to look in one spot. But here you have the same stars, same sizes, same color variety. But if you group all of them together except for one, or if you place one aside from everything else, suddenly you have emphasis. Clearly the one star that's kind of like that medium pink off to the right is getting more attention than everything else. And that's because of how it's grouped and how it's placed within the other elements of the composition. And then similar, size and repetition can also be a way to kind of get your viewer to look in one spot. So using the same basic design, the stars again, and you can see there's still a variety of color. There is some variety of size, definitely variety of placement, but that one star that's clearly larger than everything else is going to attract your attention. So the fact that it's like everything else but different in size makes you want to look there. So that's how you would have size and repetition, because like the star is being repeated, it's a different size. Sometimes you could just use size, like this ridiculous artwork has just a super large chick. So you're going to want to look at that chick more than anything else because it's just super large. So you don't always have to have repetition, but sometimes they go together, sometimes they don't. And next up we have isolation. Sometimes isolation, again, it kind of feels like grouping and placement. You can kind of say that maybe this one star here is isolated. You could also maybe say that this is a bit of a simple artwork. I would argue it's not super simple because this has a lot of detail and that has a lot of detail. But she is isolated in this field, and that kind of makes all the attention keep going back to her over and over again. So these are all examples of how you have emphasis made through different techniques, and what you're going to do now is a little worksheet. Let's go over that together. Let's see if I open... So this is printed for you, but if you don't have the printed version, that's fine. You can just do this in your sketchbook completely. But the directions are, now that you've watched this video, what I want you to do is complete this worksheet and demonstrate that you understand the different concepts. So in each of the rectangles here, you have the type of emphasis I want you to try and create, emphasis with line, with shape, with value, color, and so on. And in the space, I want you to make a little artwork or a little composition that demonstrates it. And what you should do, though, is you should create original designs. You cannot repeat examples from the video, so don't just like draw a bunch of stars that are kind of pink and redo the ones I gave you. Come up with your own designs. You must use color. You must fill the space as much as possible within the limits of the challenge. And then in each design, what you should also be doing is striving to create a balanced, interesting composition. And now you can use abstract, like in the video I showed you some abstract arrangements of line, shapes, and color, and some representational images like the chick and the lady in the field. They were all representational. So you can decide if you want to do one or both. That's up to you. And then again, if you don't have this worksheet, just draw rectangles on a page in your sketchbook, and then you can turn in a photograph of that. And then this will be graded, just like I usually grade your homework questions. And then it'll be 10 points, 20 points. Every one you do is either correct, partially correct, or incorrect. So that's how this will all be graded. If you have any questions, I'm not in, so talk to a classmate. And I hope you have some fun with it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do here.